recording.
Well, welcome. This is the Electronic Resources Interest Group pop-up. We are part of MiALA, and the pop-up is entitled Librarians and Vendors, Colleagues and Collections. I'm Leanne Rumler. I am the chair of the eResources Interest Group, and Patrick Roth is the chair-elect. Each of us came up with this idea separately, and then when we got together as part of the interest group, we realized, oh, we've got the same idea. And Patrick recently presented this same type of panel down at the Charleston conference, and that went very well. So Patrick agreed to help me with this pop-up. We have a set of prepared questions to get started, but we encourage everybody to ask questions at any time. Or if you just have comments that you would like to make, please do so. Those of you tuning in through Zoom, use the chat feature, please, and we will monitor that and answer your questions. I want to take a minute to thank MCLS for hosting the pop-up here, and especially Heather Ledisky for all the help she has given us. And she's not here anymore.
She snuck out.
Okay. So anyway, if this all goes well, she is a big reason for that. Lastly, we ask that you keep your comments and questions collegial. We are here to learn from one another and to become better at our respective professions. Each of us will introduce ourselves, and I will go ahead and go first since I'm already talking. I am one of two technical services librarians at Hillsdale College. We're a small liberal arts college, and like many librarians in small colleges, I wear many hats. I am responsible for all the electronic resources, serials, and standing orders. I do everything from start to finish with the electronic resources, from purchasing to paying invoices, licensing, ERM, all of it. And so in the course of that, I work with a vast variety of vendors. So I'm looking forward to this.
Sure, I'll go next.
Okay.
So I'm Sarah Tarpley, and I'm Director of Academic Product Sales for Gale. And I've been with the organization for nearly 16 years now, and I've held a variety of roles. I've been in marketing, I've been in sales, I've been a customer trainer, I've been in product development, and I currently am in a unique role at the organization where I tie together sales, marketing, and product for the academic channel specifically at Gale. And what I do is I help to develop relevant sales plays that resonate with our partners, you all, in the market. And I also train and help develop the sales team. So the sales representatives that you liaise with, I help train them on not only Gale products, but the market itself and competition as well, friendly competition.
I'm Patrick Roth from Grand Valley State University. In my normal job, I'm the head of systems and technology, but for the last year, I've been the interim head of knowledge access and resource management, which is really just technical services. As Leanne mentioned, this idea kind of came up from realizing that the way systems librarians kind of work with vendors is really different from the way that electronic resources and works with their vendors. So I just thought it would be interesting to have this conversation.
I'm Nancy Kirkpatrick. I'm the Associate Director of MCLS and the Manager of Group Purchasing, and I've been here for almost 3 years. And before that, I was actually the Library Director at Marian University in Indianapolis. So I have lots of experience with collection development, I think, from both sides of the eResources and managing licenses. And I'm also an attorney, so the licensing thing is pretty normal for me. So that's okay.
Neil Stamm, I'm the Vice President of Product Management at ProQuest Information Solutions. My responsibility and my team's responsibility is what we call aggregation products. So some of you might know ProQuest Central, some of the newspapers, K-12 products, genealogy, so a very broad set of different kind of electronic resources. In my former jobs, I was also a regional sales director for Elsevier, among other things covering Michigan. So some of you might know Ken Wheeler, who used to report to me in my past job. So I do have a little sales experience at some point as well. So hopefully we can talk broadly to this topic.
Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Go ahead and start us off?
Sure. As Leanne mentioned, if anyone has questions or comments, please, we really want this to be a discussion, but we do have a question to get the conversation started. So from both the librarian perspective and the vendor perspective, what is like one thing that we could do differently that could make each other's jobs easier?
Who do you want to start?
I can start. We briefly commented, talked about this prior to the meeting in just casual conversation, but emails really, and I think Neil's had the good best point here. Really specifying in a subject line if it's a sales email or if it's a you need to do something email. Too many times from the librarian's perspective, those look similar, and as you guys can all imagine, I'm sure I'm not the only one that gets 500 emails a day. It's hard to know where to spend your time, so you end up spending your time going through all these emails, some of which aren't really relevant to the support or vendor relations side, but more to the sales side.
I can talk about it. One of the things I always really enjoy when I'm engaging on the sales side or in general is transparency and decision process. So really understand what is the decision process and also what information can be provided that help you make an informed decision. Because companies like Gale and Progress have a lot of information available. So we can actually help you with a lot of insights that can help you make a more informed decision as you go forward. So better having that conversation would be really helpful.
I would say communication in general. So we're usually the people in the middle, because that's what we're here for. So just to communicate whether there's a problem or an issue or a challenge, or actually when you were talking about the decision-making process, sometimes we don't always know the right person to contact. So if we're not contacting the right person, to communicate that to us, both on the library member side and on the vendor side. So it's just, I think communication is probably our biggest challenge.
And from my perspective, I think the one thing that the quote unquote other side, that sounds very Stranger Things, the one thing that the other side might be able to sort of do to make my job easier or our sales team's job more easy is really just kind of being more open and honest, again, a little bit more transparent. We understand, we're all human, we understand that things change, priorities change. I think it's just important to keep us abreast of, based on the relationship that you have with your sales representative, just to keep us informed. We understand that budgets are tight. So when we do come in to visit you, we're already aware. So I think just more transparency, more open, honest communication and feedback along the way as priorities shift or change in the library. I think that's just a great way to kind of keep us abreast of what your needs and what your goals and what your challenges are, so that we can be more prepared to help you.
There's a question from the chat people.
Comment from Maureen. Systematic and open action on requests for enhancements or changes to products would be really helpful to librarians. Even if something can't be changed, it's helpful to know that upfront and have documentation for future reference.
No, I think that speaks to some of the questions I was prepared in advance. We're going to get into maybe a little bit later in depth. Especially large companies like Gale and Progress, we spend a lot of time creating internal processes for taking all these requests in, because we obviously get a lot of requests on a daily basis. I think we track them internally. We're not always good enough about communicating back to whoever made the request to say, okay, you saw this request, either for various reasons, it's not something we can accommodate, at least not in the near future, or when it then does happen, say, a couple of months down the road, now it's actually happened, so you don't sort of have to discover it by yourself that these things happen. I think it's something we need to continue to work on, creating more transparency, because often interaction doesn't end with you sending in the request and us saying we now put it in our backlog of requests. There is another action, say, down the road when this request is actually sort of implemented.
Yeah, I've had that feeling that I send out a request and it goes into a black hole, and I don't hear anything.
To be quite honest, it's transparent. Sometimes it is a black hole and it doesn't really move anywhere.
Yeah.
Be honest about that as well. That does happen. So.
What's the best way to address that? Then re-email after a month, after how much time is
So I think it depends a bit on the severity of the request. There are certain things that are just small bug fixes, and these will go into that big large backlog. It takes time. If it's something that's more severe, something where you really would like to get our attention, contact and say you want to talk to a product manager. That doesn't hurt either. Then typically we will put contact, they will listen, and that's give you a little bit more direct channel to the people who actually are in control of what happens when, so to speak. If it's, for instance, those are content requests, typically we would report back very quickly whether we can fix it or we can't fix it. Sometimes we just don't have the content or something else might be going wrong. But yeah, in general, we have set up processes so that when you contact us to the context information on the website, our promise and response time is 8 hours at maximum, typically it's more like 2 hours. We get back to you saying, we now send it to this person, and then that person's responsibility to follow back. And there's somebody tracking that we actually do get back. So when this gets forward, say a product manager or somebody in our content operations, there's somebody sitting tracking that they get back to you. If they don't get back to you, then follow up and then we'll see. And again, if it's severe enough, put in the text you would like to speak to a product manager, and he or she will contact you.
So piggyback on that a little bit, how do we, so like if I want a project done at Grand Valley, internal to Grand Valley, there are schedules where like I would need to submit that, or I have to wait a whole year before I can ask again. And then when I think about my systems experience, if I want an enhancement to something, I can submit that, and then other people can see it most of the time and then upvote it, downvote it, whatever. Is there a way to work into existing cycles that you guys have to make enhancement requests move along quicker, or get more support for them, or?
Well, obviously, if you rally a lot of librarians behind you and say this is really important, then it happens faster. There's obviously a prioritization based on how frequent you get.
But do you have a system?
Yeah, so just let me give you a little bit of transparency to how we work on it. So about 30% of our quote unquote development time is reserved for maintenance, creating small updates, fixes, things like that. And then there's 70% is creating new products, or making sort of major, more larger projects. It does go into a backlog. It gets prioritized in the backlog, so that's sort of different level of severity in terms of it. And then the product managers and developers regularly look at this. Also, if there's more and more people come in, it moves up priority. They look at it on a regular basis and say, okay, which ones are now the most urgent for us to fix, so to speak. So that's a regular kind of process. But just like you mentioned, is for larger projects, there is a long roadmap for some of these things. It gets reprioritized a little bit more frequently than every year, because we do work a little bit faster than that. But it's something we look at constantly. So yes, if you suddenly rally all of ALA coming and saying, hey, Procus, you need to change this, it will happen tomorrow, right? But if it's one request from one librarian or from one user, it gets pretty low down the priority list.
I'll volunteer if you need help rallying the librarians. I mean, we're sort of the obvious contact for that, right? If we hear the same message from a lot of our members, and then we go to ProQuest or Game Base and mention that, then that it has a lot more weight, because they realize that it isn't just 1 or 2 librarians; it's 27, and they all have this issue.
You might as well just be honest. The more money you spend with us, the more likely it is that you get our attention. I'm just in terms of transparency and openness, that does work that way to some degree. So.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add, so it's very similar in terms of the development process at Gale. We develop in an agile, framework. So we're iterating on product on an ongoing basis and on our platforms on an ongoing basis. There is a certain amount of development time that is dedicated, obviously, to producing new product, which is how we butter our bread, per se. So if we don't have the new product, we're not going to be able to maintain the business. So that's kind of why that scale is differentiated in terms of like the maintenance backlog. But we do have a system. We use Jira to track any customer enhancements or bug fixes that are requested. And that helps us identify where the volume is in terms of having multiple customers sort of reporting on the same perhaps issue or bug. And that helps us then scale that as a priority. So then we're alerted to sort of take more swift action towards those things as they are scaled and in their impact in terms of severity is measured. The other thing I would offer too is that if you ever want to become involved in developing products or the reiteration of existing products, we are always looking for customers that are open for user testing. So not only do we test with librarians, such as yourself, but we also do testing with sort of that end user at the student level. We test with persons with disabilities and so on and so forth. So we're always looking throughout our development cycles feedback. And so if you are interested in that, I would say reach out to your account representative, and then they can get you in touch with myself or a product manager, and we can kind of get you involved in that process. And that way you feel like you're being heard a little bit more on the front end and not so much sort of on the back end after perhaps the release. You can sort of offer your feedback sort of in the beginning or the development process. We also do lots of surveys. So if you do see a survey from a Gale product manager asking for feedback, let's say on an existing product where we're looking to iterate on it, please, generally in those surveys, we will sort of have a section where you can enter in your contact information if you'd like to participate in further conversations or further user testing. So we are always encouraging sort of that participation and partnership with you all as well. So please get involved or share that. If it's not, if we were talking about emails earlier, if that email hits you or that survey hits you and you're perhaps not the right person, recommend that this be forwarded. Forward it to one of your colleagues that might be more well suited perhaps to, based on their subject area or area of interest to kind of fill it out and get feedback. To us.
No, I say you just echo everything Sarah said. We do exactly more or less the same, but also take advantage of the fact that you actually do have a number of significant vendors here in Michigan. You're close by, so like when our UXD team go out, it's like, yeah, we do need to make sure we have geographical spread around the world so they get different inputs, but they do overweight someone visits here in Michigan, so they go out much more often in Michigan than any other parts of the world, so to speak. So take advantage of that as well as we go forward.
I just have a comment. I'm Fran from the Lansing Community College Library, and our reference librarians for a Gale product, for example, were having trouble figuring out how a keyword search was searching. So it was unclear to me, like, who do I go to for this? Like, should I ask the list, the mail database list, or is anyone having issues, or do you know anything about this? We couldn't find documentation. So I ended up going through support, and then none of my questions got answered really, and they did, but they didn't get answered.
Right.
And finally ended up in development, who was able to give us some answers about how keyword search was working. But now I'm thinking, well, maybe I should have gone through product development. I mean, I guess I'm trying to come up with strategies to be informed about how things are searching and without documentation, that kind of thing, how the best method is to get answers on that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, so from my perspective, I think specifically in the academic channel, I would suggest that potentially your account representative is the best person. We always have tech support available, but the relationship that you have with your account representative, the pure nature that you have a question or an inquiry about the keyword search is something that I think that library sales consultant should be aware of, right? And then they can get it directly to myself or the product manager if you would like a very swift answer. I do think that sometimes tech support is more of like, do you have your proxy set up correctly? Do you have your, but I think as you all, I consider technical buyers, where you sort of want to know the nuts and the bolts of an algorithm, right? A search algorithm is what you're asking for. I'm not, I would say that is a pure product manager question. And so someone like myself or a product manager could very easily answer that. And your library sales consultant can directly channel you towards that quick response. Versus I think sometimes the technical support group is just more to establish, here's where you got your usage report set up, and here's how we make sure your easy proxy is working. And I hate to say that, but I do think as technical buyers, you're going to have some questions related to content there's pieces of content, a 17th century primary source that hasn't been OCR'd correctly or something like that. And I do think going through your library sales consultant for that, who can direct it to specifically a product expert, is going to give you a quick answer. So that would be my response. I think it'll take a little bit longer if you go through tech support to kind of filter to the right people. It'll always get answered 100%, but to be honest, I think that just helps to fortify your relationship with your library sales consultant, where you can see how swiftly they can act on your behalf.
Yeah, because it always gets caught up in that first line of support, which is, as you said, more sort of thing, whereas your question is clearly a more second line or sort of follow-up question. Or just be very clear if this is first in the written communication, like this is not sort of just my password. This is a simple question. I really like to understand the depth. Then whoever screens the question should be better at forward and second line support. If they don't, then we have a task inside in our organization to also figure out how we make sure that we better screen those questions. That's an ongoing conversation we have. But to your point as well, is the account manager or account representative, part of their job is to help you navigate our organizations. Because just like universities can be quite complex for us to figure out, our organizations are very complex for outsiders to figure out as well. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so just as we ask for, may we speak to a faculty member in this area, right? And you help us or you guide us towards another subject liaison or something like that, that you help introduce us around your campus. Your library sales consultant should be doing that same introduction for you for our organization internally at Gale or Purpose.
So a question, what is the next person we should contact if the account rep doesn't reply for several weeks? Sometimes we've had help setting something up, but we need to tweak it a month later, and then I can't get a response from the same people I worked with previously.
Well, yeah, I would say that's completely unacceptable.
Yeah, that was my response as well. You need to talk to your manager about it's not responding.
Yeah,
so the question is because it sounds like they might have talked to somebody deeper in the organization and then responding back to them. Again, I would call it unacceptable. So I would send sort of a little sort of anger is maybe not the right word, but sort of say I take this to sort of the general inquiries, because then there will be this is somebody's messed up in this particular situation, and there will be a response, because that shouldn't happen in the first place. That's really not acceptable. That's not in line with, I'm sure, either of our policies or guidelines. That's what's happening. So.
Yeah. So I think in the panel meeting, you have my contact information for Gale. So you can always escalate to me if that happens again. So copy down my name, and my email address is sarah.tarpley@cengage.com, and I will make certain that does not happen again.
Yeah, at Grand Valley, we've always had luck if we can't get support to answer a question, or we've asked someone else and we can't get an answer, to go straight to our sales rep. They are wanting to make you happy. And so if you tell them, we track our problems and this has been down for 2 weeks and no one's responding to us, it's crazy how quickly you can get a response back from those people.
All the alarm bells goes off.
Yeah.
So
again, use your relationship with your sales rep.
And if you're not sure who your sales rep is, or if something has changed, we keep track of everything in like a CRM system as well. So, sometimes those changes happen and we're just not all aware. So don't be afraid to come to us and ask, or we may know who your sales rep's boss is. Not that we would ever go there, but if you needed to escalate it, we might be able to figure out the appropriate person to escalate it to get your issue resolved.
They need a follow-up.
To your point, Patrick, mentioning how long you've been waiting has been very effective.
Yes.
So if you've been waiting for 2 weeks, saying I've been waiting for 2 weeks is very effective.
They said, okay, I'm not sure how to get a manager. And it was EBC, no offense, ProQuest. Both the EBC rep and the ProQuest rep haven't replied in weeks.
Okay, send me the information. I will contact them. I'm not responsible for the books side of it, but I'm happy to figure out who it is. No problem.
I wanted to follow up on something Nancy said. This is Kara from Grand Valley, for those who are tuning in virtually. You mentioned if we wanted to rally for a product enhancement to come to MCLS, and you would collate that. Is there a listserv that would be best, or email to you, or what's the best way?
I would say the easiest thing is probably email services@mcls.org, because we use sort of one main box to kind of track all the things that we do. But we also have a couple of lists. There's an ACAD ref list. There's an eJournal list. So if that's a place you're more comfortable having a conversation sort of informally before you decide to rally on something, I would, yeah, I would, you know, try one of those too.
Okay.
And we're also now, most of us are members, I think everybody in our department is now a member of MiALA, so we'll be on those lists
Oh,
now.
yeah.
So that is a good place
Okay.
to.
Thanks.
No, no, so in general, obviously, we try to engage as much as we can in the community, not just here in Michigan, but around the world. And the public list servers, we do read, or somebody in the product manager similar would read this and follow those as well. So if something either gets mentioned in our products or some of our competitor products, we always read that with great interest. Obviously. So.
Okay. All right, well, that's a lot of good information there. And our next question was kind of along those same lines with multiple contacts, and how do you know where to go? So I think we've kind of covered a lot of that. So talking about access, if you have lost access, what is the best way to go about getting your access restored? Where do you start? Do you start with tech support? Do you start with the rep? Where do you go?
I would try either, because sometimes the rep might be on the road on a plane or something, it's difficult to get in contact with. But I would definitely recommend calling, because we want to restore access as quickly as possible. And that's the fastest way. So either calling or using the chat function. We have a chat function as well. That will get their attention right away, because obviously the first step is to identify why don't you have access any longer, because it can be for multiple various reasons. But call up tech support, call your account rep, where we can get on the phone. The tech support you can always get on the phone. The account rep might be traveling or in a meeting, so it might be a little more difficult to get contact that within a few minutes during the day, no problem whatsoever, typically unless they're on vacation. So call tech support, they can help you figure out what the issue is, typically very quickly. Because it's in neither you or our interest to not have you have access to the products, obviously.
So and this makes me think of one very specific situation with one very particular vendor. But when an account gets compromised and someone's credentials have been stolen, and we don't notice before the vendor, because we do monitor and we do try to keep that result fixed. But we have one particular vendor who just shuts us down. And if that's a problem, we use Easy Proxy. So they shut down the Easy Proxy server, which means no one off campus can access that resource. So I'm sure we're not the only library that runs into that problem. What can we do it's neither of you guys, but what can we do to better communicate the situation to you guys, and how important it is that we're working to resolve the situation? And while the situation's not yet resolved, is there any way to get that access turned back on?
So I think, first of all, I think there are different vendors have different policies.
Yeah.
Some are really strict in shutting down. I think most of the large ones, that's really the last resort is to shut anybody down. We will throttle it, make it slower, we will do all that kind of things first. I think first and foremost, make sure that your account rep knows who the contact person is for those kind of situations, because often we don't know who to contact either, necessarily who is the best person to contact. Because we would want to establish a direct link between our security technical outside organization and the library to sort of have that ongoing communication. Like, we're trying to resolve it, what are we trying to do, what is the timeline for what we're trying to resolve. So give that contact, call tech support again, because it will be flagged in our system, just like you're talking about it. We have different tracking systems internally. We flagged in the system because we, like other vendors, we obviously have monitoring on the security side. There's different ways you can do this. Some people just use relatively simple thresholds. We use a little bit more sophisticated sort of using artificial intelligence. So we look at past pattern and see if there's something unusual, and then sort of, and the first step is always throttle it down, just make it slower. So you can still download, but you might not be able to take like 50 documents in a minute or something like that. Slow it down, and then if that doesn't solve the trick, then we'll try and contact you and say, hey, there's something going on here. Can you help us figure out what that is? So therefore, keep that contact information, because typically that's not the day-to-day person that we engage with for sales purposes. That's your point is technical. So, but keeping the dialogue open. And if you can't get contact, call your account rep, call your technical support. They can help you to try and find the right person. Because it's becoming more and more frequent, these attacks, unfortunately. And obviously, we also have a responsibility to the publishers we work with to make sure that their content is secure as possible. You do see certain vendors, especially some of the high-end abstract and indexing databases, that are very concerned about people downloading those and replicating. So when we talk to like the American Psychological Association or in terms of other vendors, ACS for sci-financing, that I know that they're very, very quick to close down, and their thresholds are typically much smaller than ours.
Yeah, no, very similar. I mean, I think obviously library sales consultant and tech support, I would pick up the phone just as Niels said. I mean, because that's something that needs to be resolved swiftly. So grab that old school phone and instead of emailing to get a swift resolution on that. But in a very similar sense, I don't want to repeat things just for the sake of repeating them. But we kind of operate in a very similar fashion to ProQuest at Gale. So we have ways in which we can easily identify who or what that bot perhaps is, and kind of.
And also, if you can also ask your rep. We are obviously not going to say clearly what our thresholds are, anything like that, because that would mean that people can figure a way around them.
Yeah.
But there are some things we can share in terms of just what the policy are, and some of those things. And ask your account reps for sharing that information. If they don't, they might not have it directly because they don't get asked for it every day, but we can help them find that information as needed.
Do either of you have a set policy as far as if access is lost, not necessarily because of a bot or whatever, on what's acceptable for downtime?
So the answer is none, basically. In general, the answer is no. There really shouldn't be any downtime. Nowadays, systems are created, especially if they're cloud-based. So not necessarily all our most old legacy platforms. They might actually require taken down to do an update on those. But anything that's relatively new typically does not require downtime anymore for updating or refreshing. So if there is actually significant downtime, it's typically because something went wrong in one of the multiple fail-safes that are. So we did have an incident like this a couple of months back, where one of the servers went down, and typically there's 2 or 3 different fail-safes, so we just switch over to another server and take care of it that way. But the vendor who provided this service for us said they had never seen this happen before. They had promised us this could never happen, and they had never seen it before. And it took significant time to resolve because they had never seen it before. They didn't even know how to do it. So they basically almost like flew their people into whatever location this was happening in and tried to resolve it. So the answer is none. It does happen, unfortunately. What we do nowadays, if there is something happening like that, if it's something that's unexpected, Twitter, Facebook, email communication goes out more or less right away as quickly as you can to keep transparency on what is happening and what is the time we expect to resolution. Because we're going to be trying to fix it. They're going to work all night long if needed. Everybody to this. If it is something where we have to do planned downtime, maybe something really, really major, or it's a migration, we try really hard to be communicating that very well in advance, not only by email communication, but also banners in the platform itself, things like that. Because we know this is something that is very problematic, downtime. What we also try to do is really schedule anything where there might come a disruption. We look very carefully at usage patterns and then try to do it when there's least usage. So this is typically US weekend, typically not at the end of term, so obviously not around exam time. It's a really bad time of doing things like that. So we do think very carefully about these things before taking anything down.
Yeah, so likewise, I mean, so in the last 12 months, I think our uptime has been 99.96%. So like I mean, it's really not an issue so much these days with the cloud-based hosting that's available to us. We do have some scheduled downtimes. To give you an idea, in the last 12 months, we've had 5 scheduled downtimes, and very similar to what Niels has articulated, we will give no less than 7 days in advance, but we will email that information out. We will post it on social media and our blogs when a planned outage is going to transpire. And generally, it's for a very short period of time, and that maintenance outage is usually scheduled between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Eastern, and that is based off of an analysis of usage patterns and so on and so forth. So we want to minimize any downtime whatsoever for students, and we have a global a base of users, so we have to make sure that what we're doing, really does span the globe in terms of planned downtimes and sort of giving sufficient notification for those. So we're pretty good, pretty solid about that in terms of providing a stable base of products for you all to use on campus.
I actually have an off-the-sheet question. I don't know what made me think of this, but one of the things that popped into my head, and it relates back to the first question, is about database name changes, URL changes. Those don't always happen during, like, when you don't try to schedule, like, downtimes. Like, those just happen, like, you know, from vendors, they just seem to randomly pop up at the worst possible times. How can we better alert vendors that maybe changing the URL for an entire database or an ebook package or whatever in the middle of December isn't the best plan? Like,
first of all, that shouldn't really happen. So I'm disappointed that I know that there are some also when we work with third parties, when they do things like that, it's like, are you crazy? This does not work. First of all, I would make a lot of noise that this is really just unacceptable from your perspective, because then there's a good chance it won't necessarily happen a second or third time. I think in general, at least when we do changes like that, it's something that is planned out well in advance, really clearly thought about a communication plan. We make sure that the URLs redirect for an extended period of time, so even if you are using the old URL, they'll go over. If it's an old platform you're closing down, there'll be increasingly alarming messages coming around and saying, like, this is gonna disappear in like 2 weeks' time. You need to do something here. But it's a tricky thing, because often we do send around a lot of communication beforehand, but it might not be to the right person, or it might get lost in all the emails. And it can be very difficult to reach people in that regard. As soon as then they lose access, then all the alarm bells goes off. Right? So if we do a major thing like that, we also work very closely with technical support, so they are knowing this well in advance. They're ready for the call volume that may or may not come at that stage as well. But I would also put it back on the vendor to do the redirects and all these other kind of things. So even if you're using the old URLs, it doesn't change. The other thing with product names, so we have gone through a number. You might have seen some simplification of the portfolio I'm responsible for, because we got to the point where we had like 700-800 different products, and it's like even the product managers didn't know what products they had anymore. It didn't make any sense. So we tried to clean up our product names, try to get more consistency in, but we didn't try to do it as a once exercise. We want to try and do it that you see it at your time of renewal, for instance. So it comes when you are in part of the conversation with us anyway, so you sort of get notice that this is going to happen. But it can be very complicated, complex process.
Is there some place like on the vendor website that we can find that information so that we could follow it? For example, is there an email list or a blog or some spot where if we're wondering if things have changed, that we can just check it periodically on our own just to kind of stay abreast of that?
Yeah, so we have blog.gale.com, and there is specifically a product update tab within that blog, and you can subscribe to that blog if you'd like. But the product update portion of that is where we post all of the sort of planned changes, enhancements,
Content updates,
etc. So that's, again, blog.gale.com, and then you'll look for the product updates tab.
So exactly, that's all the universal kind of upgrade. I think part of the trick might also be sometimes you are not necessarily upgrading all the customers at the same time, and therefore it's not something you can necessarily put in a general blog, but it's something where you work individually with the customers. But that should, again, work through your account reps or people. And something goes wrong in that communication, that's up to permanent. It's not the right person, like, because more often not, it's just because we haven't talked to the right person or all the people who should be there. So this goes back to communication and trying to figure out who to talk to. It's going to be a constant struggle to some degree.
Should we talk about negotiations?
Oh, we should.
How much leeway is there in pricing? Does it depend on your size? How much money we're spending as a company? I know in the case of MCLS, they have numbers behind them, so that helps. But for an individual library negotiating for a resource, how much leeway is there?
So I say, first of all, it all depends, because different types of products, different business model, different situations will all have different answers to that question. It also is a matter of, for me, it's actually more about justification than sort of say leeway, because I don't really like the transactional used car sales kind of negotiation where you just hammer your seller based on a discount or a price level. I think it's very important to talk about, okay, is there some specific reasons why this should be cheaper in this particular case, whether this is we have lost a department or something else is going on or we're increasing. Those kind of things should factor into that consideration as you go forward. In terms of full transparency, I think most organizations have some level of discount approval level inside the organization. So like an account manager can do certain things, regional manager can do certain things. Those are not things we in general communicate outwards for obvious reasons. I would say in general, actually, the more transparency, the less leeway there is. So the more transparent the pricing mechanism is, the less you can actually negotiate the price. It sounds maybe a little counterintuitive, but that's typically the way it works. There's typically also things, if these are subscription products or they are high royalty, but there's other people in the background, basically determine the price. So when we are distributing a product on behalf of another organization, say an abstract indexing database or some other products, we basically have no leeway. They are the ones who decide the price for us, and I can try as best to go in the back and negotiate with them, but I tend to sort of say, no, we're not going to do it because we're trying to keep this consistent and universal for everyone across. Whereas if it's maybe a collection, typically that's also where you see the bigger discounts associated with those. But have an open conversation, share information, share your concerns. I think most of the account reps are trying to be fair because they're looking for a long-term relationship. They're not looking for making a quick dollar here and there. They're looking for how do you come and buy from us not only today, but also come back next year, because we want to service you for long-term in the future as well. I think that's the nice part of, at least when I worked in sales in this industry, I felt was that we're really trying to build a long-term relationship. We're trying to share information. I'm not interested in selling anything to you as a library if there's no value to your patrons. If you get the product and there's no uses of it, I'm not going to be any better off and you're not going to be any better off. So we want to sell you something where the right value is right. And obviously, if it's a subscription product, we look carefully, just like I'm sure all of you do, is cost per retrieval, cost per usage kind of data, and see, whoa, this is really high. Maybe we should consider helping you a little bit on the price, like maybe getting some additional information here. Or quite frankly, this is a really, really good cost per use. You're really getting a lot of value out of this. So maybe we should have been a little harder in negotiations. So I think we look at the same data, same information.
Do you want to weigh in on negotiations?
Yes. Trying to figure out what I can say in my head and what I should say out loud. So negotiating time is always challenging for us because we are negotiating group deals. So the whole point for us is to give you more bang for your buck because you participate in groups. So sometimes that's challenging if we have vendors who will offer the same deal to people who go direct. So I would say if there's any way to discourage that because there is value to both sides in coming through us. There's value to the vendor because this time you save in licensing, for example, and invoicing, and there's value to our members because you're saving money and you don't have to deal kind of with the same things with the licensing and invoicing. But I was jumping ahead to one of these questions about how much leeway is there in pricing or payment structure. I don't know on the vendor side how much leeway there is, but that's, I think, one of the benefits that we offer is that if something comes up and you're having an issue and we send you an invoice and you say, well, I need to wait a month or 3 years split it into 2 payments or something, that's, if we know about it ahead of time, that's something we can easily accommodate. We just need to know what's going on. So that kind of goes back to the clear communication. But I will say that we are pretty strong advocates for you if you ever want to be in the room when Crystal and I or Megan and I are trying to get increases. We fight for you as hard as we can. And the vendors your sales rep will probably say, yes, Crystal and Nancy have already told us anything above 4% is not acceptable. So we'll try to bring, there's, we know the pressures that you guys are facing because we work with you every day. So if there's anything that you guys think that we could do differently or better from the negotiation standpoint, that's the other thing, please tell us. If you feel like we're not advocating as hard on your behalf as we should be, we need to know that so that we can change what we're doing.
And I would strongly encourage sharing what the metrics you're looking at and some of those guidelines, because then you don't have to spend a lot of time just running these head against each other. There's things that you use like, this is a red flag. We're never going to go above this. Be open about it, be transparent about it. But I also really encourage talking about what metrics are you using to measure value, because sometimes a measure might not actually be appropriate for that particular resource. So we've often heard things like cost per search. Cost per search is actually very platform dependent. So I can get my cost per search down tomorrow just by doing some tweaks in the way I set up the platform. And then suddenly you're having 2 times the search volume. But that doesn't actually give a better user experience. That doesn't give more value to your patrons. Whereas cost per retrieval, if you're talking full text, obviously it's a good measure, because the point is to get to the full text more often than not. So encourage having that discussion about what is the good metric for this particular type of resource to look at as you go forward. And I know that's something we work with our sales team on, so the other thing, really continue to train them on having these kind of conversations and getting more and more information, because we do know more and more about if a user is successful in their objective or not. We, just like a lot of other people use Google Analytics to track, and we have sort of different goal criteria and say like, well, if they drop off halfway through the experience, that's not a success for us, right? We're trying to get them to a piece of information that can actually use going forward. But I think the sophistication of this discussion will become better and better. I know there's a lot of changes in Counter 5 coming out here shortly, which hopefully facilitate some of those discussions as well to go forward.
Nancy, I'm wondering, other than participating in the group, what can libraries do to help you in your negotiations?
Well, usage stats would be helpful things. So whatever you guys are using to make your decisions about value would be helpful for us to know, because we know that budgets are either flat or declining. That's kind of a given, but we don't know how you determine what resources are most important to you. So if you can say to us, well, you know, the X product, we've seen usage go down 27%, so we feel like it's not of much value. That would be helpful for us to know when working with a vendor, because we don't usually see any of your usage stats. You guys get those individually, so I think that would be helpful.
When is the right time to send you that stuff?
Before your renewal. So it depends on what product you have when they renew, but I would say at least 3 months ahead of your renewal time gives us enough time. Or do you think I'm looking at Crystal more than 3? Okay. As much time as you can give us would be
4 to 5 months would be.
Some of these renewals tend to start like 6 months out of lease.
Well, they do, yeah, but some of them start out, it depends on the renewal. So if it's an annual renewal, 6 months out might be hard because you don't have as much data, but some of the things that we do are multi-year contracts. So in that case, yes, as much lead time as you can give us before we start negotiating for another 3-year deal is helpful.
Especially for the multi-year deals, then we really want to have a good data set to look at.
Yes.
Because especially the larger vendors, they're prepared for that kind of discussion as well.
Good.
They will have looked at the same data as you have,
Right,
if they're doing
course.
their appropriately. They will have looked at the same data, or at least we should be looking at the same data. Because they also want to know where they're at risk, because obviously, as you said, whoa, if users went down 20-30%, clearly we have a problem here.
Right.
Let's try and figure out what's going on. Is this because they bought another resource they're utilizing? Is this some change on the library homepage so they can't find the resource anymore? Whatever it might be, people are interested in trying to resolve that. So especially if you take some of the big primary publishers, I know we're both aggregators, some of the big primary publishers. I'm going to put my Elsevier hat on for a few seconds here. All the way up to the top level in that organization, they look at users all the time. So if users goes down in general on the big platforms, that goes to the CEO level, like what is going on? Why is our users going down? And try to resolve that issue, because they know how important that is in those renewal discussions as to go forward.
Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, this is Sarah Simon from Grand Valley. So perhaps maybe one of the best ways to approach that would be at the end of renewal time, if we've had communication that a resource, we've seen a drop in usage, we're considering maybe next year canceling it or making a motion, that would be a good time to reach out to you and say, this is where we're at. We're going to encourage people to use this resource and hope to see an increase. And if we don't, we'll continue to communicate with you for negotiations.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's not over until the contract is signed.
Never.
We will continue pushing as throughout the renewal process if we know the increase is too high. So even though they've quoted pricing and we've sent that to you, if it's still high, please tell us, because we're still pushing until that contract is finalized and signed.
And frankly, even after that, we're pushing for the next term.
It's a never-ending story, I'm sure.
We never stop negotiating.
We don't. We can't.
So the emails that you get from me saying, what?
Yes.
We can't do this. That's not just it's not intended to just be whining, and you take that and use that information,
Yeah,
pass that on.
yeah, we don't see it as whining. This is the one time where I would say, please communicate often. If you are unhappy with your increases or anything else to do with it, please tell us often and as often. And yeah, because we don't see it as whining. We take those directly to the vendors and say, listen, Leanne at Hillsdale's, and we don't always name you unless I, ask ahead of time. But we will say, I've heard from 5 librarians about this renewal pricing. They're not happy. Here's why, and that it's an issue. So yeah, anytime you share that with us, it
really
always
important.
gets shared with the vendor.
Be specific about the reasons behind it, because if it's just we think you're just being opportunistic and whining, and then sort of, I'm not saying they are, but if you don't give it the justification, if you don't tell us why this is problematic, it can be very hard to get approval for doing something additional. But if there's a clear, very reasonable, very appropriate justification, the approval process for maybe doing something in this particular situation is more likely to happen.
And I will say a caveat is that if you're willing to do it for one of our members, you have to be willing to do it for all of our members, because we are, if you're able to adjust it for somebody, I know that ahead of time, that everybody in the group purchase needs to be able to benefit from that.
So I always say it, but as a sales rep, if I can't justify to the university across the street the price I just gave you, I shouldn't be giving it.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
And that's the point I wanted to make too. At Gale, in terms of negotiating, some things with third-party distributed products that we offer, things are set as a standard where you can't go below a certain threshold. The other thing that we consider very strongly is just being above board, right? We have to provide sort of that equitable price point. So if we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, would we be willing to offer this to the same academic community as your account sort of models? Would we be willing to also offer this elsewhere? And so we do sort of have to, kind of ethically test the threshold there. And I think we do a very good job of making sure that if we're going to honor an offer, that we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, yes, we could also extend this to others that sort of model the type and style of your college or university. So I just think that that's an important piece that you all should be aware of, is that we are trying to be equitable while also pursuing your needs, which is why having the backstory about why you might need a price lowered will help us, because then we're not out of compliance if we're able to have the documentation that says, well, in this scenario, we had to do it this way because of X, Y, and Z.
So exactly. In order to keep it equitable, that's why these decisions, as soon as you get over a certain threshold, go centrally, so that we do make sure that either there's a very good reason, very specific reasons where I can justify why we do this in this particular case, or we wouldn't approve it, because we don't want to. If you go back in time, there was a lot of weird things happening. So if you look, there's a lot of weird legacy pricing. So if you hear somebody having a crazy low price, it's more often than not because they got it like 5 or 10 years ago, and you obviously keep honoring that. And then that's really where some of those really strange situations come from sometimes. So.
One of the things that was mentioned when we talked about this in Charleston, and Leanne was there, was that a few of the vendors in the room had zero understanding of how library budgets and budgeting works. And they just assumed that when we said we didn't have the money, it's because we weren't advocating for the money. Do you guys, like, is that something that's shared across all of them? Like, is there a lack of understanding?
In my book, that's poor training on their side.
Yeah.
Really, one of the things we talk a lot about is understand, especially if it's a complex, I'm going to say, library or university, spend time talking to your library contacts about how their budget process works, how different things work. Because we know that these are not always simple things. I know it used to be like some libraries still are very decentralized and everything is in different budget lines. I think Madison is a good example of that in Wisconsin. Others have become much more centralized, or group purchasing, as you said. So understanding both how the budget works and how the decision process works should be a one-on-one for a sales rep to talk to you about.
Yeah, I agree. I hope that doesn't happen with any of the Gale team or my colleagues. But I think that one of the things that I think is a trend and we'll continue to see is a partnership between the library sales consultant and the library in trying to help you come up with new streams of funding, right? Whether it's, looking at the Center for Gender Studies or Inclusion, right? And how they can help fortify potentially a purchase via the library for something that will enhance your collection to make it more LGBTQ inclusive, as an example. But there are a lot of these different avenues, and I think as we work across campus in partnership with the library, I think that creatively the team, the library sales consultant from Gale, and probably ProQuest is doing the same thing, I would assume, we can help to kind of build those relationships and come up with new streams of revenue and think more kind of creatively, because that again goes with transparency, right? If humanities isn't being funded but STEM is, like, well, how can we work together to get you what you need for perhaps your humanities collection, right? To fill the needs that still exist in that with much less funding. So I think that there are some creative ways and avenues that you can partner with your library sales consultant.
And then I think we also keep testing new business models or ways where we can work within the budget constraints that might be, whether that is for books, where we've seen a lot of innovation, or primary sources, the same thing, where keep trying to come up with new ways that works better for both partners, so to speak, let's go forward. So having an open dialogue about what works and especially what doesn't work is really, really helpful in that regard. So.
Right. Yeah, different sales models. I think that's a really great point that I think I missed as well. But yeah, I mean, the different sales models, we're always willing to get you what you need and work with you in terms of the framework of your payments, your budgets, how we can offer you the content to get you going, to get your campus going and continue to have it available for your learners. So, I mean, that's the whole point. If it's not being used and we can't sell it to you, that's just unacceptable. So if you need it, there's a reason for it. Work with us. We can come up with some creative models. I've seen a lot of really interesting partnerships on that end.
Does anyone else have any questions? We do want this to be a discussion. So, okay. This sparks another question then. So if you guys are willing to try new business models and all that, what's the best way to say we're willing to be a guinea pig and try something new?
Yeah, I think collectively just bring your idea to the table in regard to your conversations with your library sales consultant, or if the consortium has comes together and collectively wants to sort of offer. Unless the conversation is there and happening, we wouldn't know what model to say, I'm going to tap you as a guinea pig, because we don't know kind of what your setup is or what your needs are. But if you have that open dialogue with your library sales consultant, right, they want to partner with you to make things happen. And it's really boring when you can't make things happen, at least on my sales team, right? So the whole point is to feel like you're accomplishing something on both ends in that partnership. And if we can make something happen with a model that works for both of us, then I think we're willing to experiment.
And when we're looking for customers to do some experimentation, we have some conversation, the first place we go and ask is the sales representation.
Yes.
So have you heard from some of your customers who might be open-minded or interested in this type of model and come to us? And then I do also think this is a place where consortia can play a really good role, because they can help facilitate some of that whiteboarding where we're thinking about new ideas that come up with new ideas. For instance, I know we've recently done some work with Skelp where we've tried some new ideas with them and tried to, does this work or not? And they can help, not just talking to one member library, but you're talking to a number of different libraries, so you don't get just one data point, but you actually get multiple inputs, because it might work for one library, but if it only works for that one library and not for everybody else, then it's really not valuable for us to pursue in general. So.
Right, and one of the ways that we support that is we actually came up with a product advisory librarian group. So there's probably people in this room that are on it. So, but when we get new ideas or new products, where we can send it out to a group of people, have them test it, and then give us data to provide back to the vendor about here's what they thought, they liked it, they didn't, they would pay this much, that kind of thing. So.
The other thing too I might offer, I don't know how many of you might have participated in perhaps a win-loss call. Have you ever been contacted by maybe a product manager after you either selected a resource or maybe decided to go with, a different resource in its place? Well, product managers inevitably do these.
We do these all the time, and they're extremely helpful.
They're extremely helpful. So they're called win-loss calls. So if you ever get a call from a product manager and they're sort of articulating this as they leave you a voicemail because you're probably away from your desk, right? Or they're sending you an email asking for some of your time, those might be great opportunities to share some insights as to what worked for you in your decision-making process, or potentially why you didn't go with the resource that you were evaluating. And if part of that conversation is, well, you didn't have the sales model that we needed, or the price was too high, or it didn't have this functionality or this kind of content, that also helps drive a better business, a better product, and better relationships as well. So if you ever sort of get these obscure maybe emails out of the blue from a product manager, that's what they're really going to just ask you. It's a very easy conversation. There's no judgment.
They're not trying to sell you anything.
No, they're not trying to sell you anything. There's nothing, nothing. It's really just a follow-up as to kind of, okay, tell me a little bit more about, your decision-making process so that we can do and partner better going forward. So. And
in general, product managers try to take all the information they can get from the marketplace in. So even if you're filling in a customer satisfaction survey or an NPS survey similar, also all the comments will be read by somebody and try to. So given product manager might not be he or her to self everything, because they also might be, but somebody will synthesize for them and collect it and make it up. So we do really scrutinize all these things in great detail to try and understand how can we better solve the problems either for a user or from the librarians and the buyers.
So this is like the second or third time you guys have mentioned like surveys or feedback.
Yeah.
How good are we at actually doing that? Because I can tell you how many of them I don't fill out.
Oh yeah, sure. It really, so surveys are one instrument, right? So that's one instrument in a whole gamut of instruments that we use. I mean, we'll do contextual inquiry, we'll do the user testing, and there's a whole realm of instruments and testing and feedback that we do. Surveys are, you're either a survey taker or you are not a survey taker.
But it sounds like you do quite a bit, and we're really missing an opportunity if we're not filling them out.
You are to some degree. I think the response rates are pretty good compared to if you use consumer surveys. The response rates are a lot lower. Okay. Actually, one of the funny things I learned recently, I didn't realize, is apparently the best time for us to send it out to get the highest response rates is sending out on a Saturday, which seems really weird to me, but that's what our current internal data tells us. So that tells me librarians are working really hard even on the weekends. So it's kind of interesting. But we do monitor those kind of things and try to get. But response rates compared to consumer surveys is very good. Okay. But obviously, still we need to send out a lot of surveys to get a qualified sample. So to speak.
And we do try to scale them, right? We're not going to send out a bunch at the same time, so there is awareness internally about the surveys. But again, generally those will be coming from a product manager. And then even if you're not thinking that you want to fill out the survey, one thing that I do, especially as I look to evaluate other products or something like that in my own personal life, I'll actually just open the survey, get a read on it, right? What is that company trying to get at? And then kind of, if I want to, kind of fill it out, then I will. But you can kind of, just by that opening entry, if it's constructed very well, you should be able to kind of get a glimpse as to whether or not it would hit on your interest area, to kind of, and there should be some knockout questions.
As you said, we try to be careful, first of all, how we structure the surveys, so we don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Because if we waste your time once, you're not going to have a response to anything else we're sending you. We're careful not, so all our email systems have these rules in them, so we don't send to you you shouldn't be getting a new one every weekend. So that we try to monitor that as well. And there's a couple of other ways where we try to be really targeted. So the more information we have about what your role is or where you sit in the library, the better we can target these kind of things. And I think we haven't always been good enough about using the information we actually did have, or even I say, hey, if you want to be really targeting the emails we sent to you, can you please fill in this little schema here, and then we can sort of be even better. I think we can do more of those kind of things to improve the relevancy of the emails similar to send out to you. You do also nowadays see very good effects if you don't just email it out, but follow it up with something either on Facebook or Twitter or things like that. That increases the response rate significantly.
The surveys I find interesting because I get them often as well, and not directed toward consortia, just as a customer. So, and every time I have filled out a survey, and I've done, I don't know if I've done a Gale, but I've done a ProQuest, I've done a couple other vendors, and I fill them out from the consortial perspective and put the comments that I'm hearing from our member libraries. I have always gotten a response, either a call or an email to say, because that's the time that we take the time to praise the things that the vendors are doing well, but to also say, here are pain points. And if I mention a pain point, I immediately get a response. In fact, I've got one from ProQuest right now that we're going to have a call on Monday about. So there's a, yeah.
No, but
it's funny to me because they really do read them, is my point. They actually read all the comments that you put in there and they follow up, which is nice. It's nice to know that if I take the time to fill it out, somebody's reading it.
So I won't promise you follow out everything comment on every single survey, because obviously we
No, but
other surveys.
yeah.
But if it's a relevant comment or something that really strikes us of interest, we want to hear more about, we will follow up. Because that's how we learn. That's part of how we learn. That's not, as you said, it's not the only way we learn. We have our portfolio of market research we do, but that's one of the key ways for us to learn, because that way we get some skill. One of the concerns we always have when we do contextual interview or observation studies, you can only do so many of them, and you don't want to just over focus on, say, 5 or 10 data points. But with a survey, for instance, you can then get some volume in and you can verify that what we saw in these interviews with a few people actually matters when you talk to a much larger group of people. So.
On the topic of communicating and language and learning, a point was brought up that sometimes there is a differing of language used. There might be more marketing style language coming from the vendors, and as the universities and the libraries are trying to develop and learn themselves and dealing with increasing budgets and increasing workloads, it's been communicated that meeting together in the middle in terms of language can help facilitate that a little easier, so that they're not trying to deal with marketing jargon as well as try to understand the concepts that they're trying to develop within their systems.
And I think it is a community where we're trying very hard to not use too much marketing language, jargon or language, whatever phrase you want to say, because we do know that that's not something that works very well. It should be much more factual based. It should be more informative than anything else, because we're all intelligent people and we should be treated as such, so to speak. I think it also, one thing I always think back on when I hear someone saying, the other thing is when we engage on the sales side in general, it really is about that relationship management. I've heard librarians when they got a new rep coming in and they're trying to make them a hard pitch because they came in from another industry. And then a good librarian sort of taken to the side and say, if you ever do that again to me, I'm not going to talk to you for like the next 6 months, because that would quickly teach them that this is not how we work in this industry. It's about open communication, it's about facts, information sharing. And that's the way we get a much better partnership and relationship as we go forward. As I said, I'm not interested in selling your product that nobody's going to use, because then you're just going to cancel it next year. And that's not in my interest. It shouldn't be in the rep's interest either. A way of spotting a good rep is someone who's not afraid of telling you, you shouldn't really be buying this product because this doesn't really fit what you're looking for right now. We might have something else, or you should be going looking at this person over here. That would be a good consultant, a good sales rep that does those kind of things.
I think as librarians, we can help the reps know that we're okay to say that too, right? By being honest and open on our end too. Like, it's not that we can't afford that; it's we don't want to afford that, right? Or
no, be clear. Like, this is not a budget decision. This is because this product actually doesn't meet our needs.
Yeah,
and then why it doesn't meet our needs.
It doesn't fit our curriculum at all. No, like.
Because when we track when things get canceled, for instance, and then the sales rep have to put in the reason for it, and basically everything says budget, and I'm sure the budget is an issue, don't get me wrong, but that's not always the reason. There's other reasons as well.
Yeah, and this was brought up at Charleston too. I think that's our go-to answer. We can't afford that. Sorry, we can't afford that. And I think more times than not, the answer really is we don't want to afford
or
that.
this other product is just better.
Yeah, and telling you that another product is better
is
very helpful, because you're going to make your product better.
And it's like we track those reasons that the sales reps put in for why this is canceled. We track them and read them very carefully. But 70-80% of them says budget. That doesn't tell me anything.
Or we can get something similar enough for $5,000 less.
Exactly. Yeah. You can buy the same value at half the price. Yeah. Hey, you should do that. Yeah,
not one of the questions, but you both have mentioned social media type communications a couple times, and it's something that I had not really looked into myself for ways of getting information from the vendors. Can you talk a little bit about that and what other types or what types you're using and how you're using it?
Oh, sure. So the whole gamut, really. There's a Gale academic Twitter that you could follow. There's Facebook, of course. We will push out we try to be informative, right, with the posts that we're publishing. Either something has transpired, or there's a really interesting correlation to materials or information that we have that we'd like to distribute in regard to a current event, or in celebration of I don't know, Pride Month or something like that, right? So we try to make it informative and learning when we do use social media, so that it isn't, I mean, it may come across as a little bit marketing, but I think that's just the nature of how marketing as a practice is evolving using social media. But I do think that there is something to be gained by having and utilizing social media, because when you start to look through your feeds, and I don't know how many of you do use Facebook or Twitter, the information comes to you, right? Like, you don't have to seek it out. And I think that that's one of the benefits that we're seeing in our communications, is that as long as you have, liked our page, or, are following us on Twitter or LinkedIn, et cetera, you're going to be seeing this the relevant communications, and then you can stop. You can stop your scroll where you want, right? If something grabs your attention, then you're choosing to go a little bit deeper and kind of click into the links or whatnot. So I think that is just kind of convenience, right? Where the information just gets pushed out to you, and then you can choose what you want to see in your feed or go deeper on. So I think that's one benefit to get engaged with vendors via social media, specifically Gale. We'd love you to follow us. But so that's just kind of one of it's the nature of the beast these days. I don't really go to many news sites. I have things set up so that it's all fed to me. So that makes it easy for me when I'm on the go. And I think all of us have one of these attached to us, so that you can get the information wherever it is that you need it.
But it is really important to your point. We're trying to keep it informative.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've been working, we've done a lot of this in our K-12 space, is utilizing the editors also to create interesting insights to either the content we're providing, or, hey, did you know this fun fact that this is how people use it? I think one of the pieces we got the most interest was around, it's probably about 9 months ago now, something like that. One of the editors made a sort of a 10 ways to spot fake news kind of guideline, and it got picked up by like USA Today and things like that, because that was a helpful tool, right? This is a really big part of the debate, still is. So the more we can do those kind of things, where it's a fun way of seeing something you might not have realized about some of the products you have access to, or the information you have access to. And also in the other direction, we do obviously monitor people's comments and animated progress. Like, one of the things really our development team, our editors, and our product team really loves is when they see somebody express happiness about utilizing one of our products. Like, this gets called out again, especially when it's a small kid using like culturegrams, things like that, and discover some new fact about a culture around the world. Like, this is like, we can't stop smiling when we see that, because it makes us happy, because it means somebody had value of some of the work we did every day. And I think one of the beautiful things about working in this industry is this notion of, if we do our job well, we're actually helping people do something that's really valuable to them, right? Either they get the research move forward, they get a new insight and they might never have done before. Because it's really about what is our users getting out of it, not whatever we do otherwise day to day. That's the important part as we go forward. So sharing some of those success stories, sharing some of those different ways people are using, I think is a really interesting way of using this media as well. And as I mentioned, we do, people, for good reasons, as you said, we get 500 emails a day, so if they start reading the emails a lot less, we're not getting a lot less, low open rates. But if we combine it with social media and we make it very informational and factual, like, hey, did you know we did this survey and you see these insights, we think this is something that might be of interest to you, then you get a lot more interest. And then you combine the social media with the email, so you might have the quick hit on a Twitter or similar, but then there's an email if you're interested, you get targeted as well. You can sort of read more about the survey, get the full story, so to speak, or the blog post. I think the other thing is inviting external people to write blog posts for us is really interesting way of doing as well. So if you've done an interesting study with some results about things that might be of interest to us, we would love to put that into our blog post or similar, and sort of help you, give you a little promotion as well for whatever studies or things you've done as part of that. Really helpful.
Yeah, we have guest editors all the time. So if you like to write and, you know, or you've potentially published or presented, we'd love to, you know, if you want an avenue for your writing to kind of get out there, we can put it on the blog. We can also share it via Facebook, Twitter, etc., and help you kind of disseminate your research or any of your passions that way as well. So we're all in it together, and there's a lot to be learned. And I think that you all are the smartest group of people that I get to interact with on a daily basis. I always learn something new when I'm interacting with our library partners, and I think it's just amazing. I lay my head on my pillow every night and I say, how did I ever wind up in this space? But I don't know, but I love it. So 16 years I'm counting, and I you know, it's just an amazing opportunity to engage in a situation where you are imparting wisdom and you're helping people learn and grow and build critical insights. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better job or opportunity to partner with you all.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit then. Accessibility is a major issue, at least at Grand Valley right now, and probably everywhere is my guess. And then many vendor websites aren't overly accessible, and a lot of content isn't. It's especially issues like in aggregators where the vendor doesn't control the content particularly. What can the library do to help push for more accessible interfaces and content? And what are you guys doing now, I guess?
I'm sure, just like you, I got like a long answer.
Yeah.
I might not go into all the details of it. First of all, it is a really high priority. I think this also, I think both Gail and us have centralized user-centered design teams, and this is one of those key priorities they have, is to keep pushing that as we go forward. There's certain content types, this is relatively straightforward and easy to do with, but as soon as you get into image-based content, things like that, also if you get into some of our legacy primary source content, it is not an easy task, right? And it does raise costs substantially. We can talk 3 to 5 times more expensive to digitize certain content and OCR in certain ways. So I think first and foremost, open dialogue is really important to understand where the pressures are coming from, what the requests are, because we don't want to develop something that is overly complicated, overly expensive, and then really is not solving the problem. Just like sometimes there might be easier way, just cost-effective to solve the problem, because we develop a product and become like, well, now it's like 3 times more expensive if you want to buy this. That's probably not going to make you happy either in that process. So open dialogue, continue to work as a community to solve this problem, because no individual vendor is going to solve this in isolation. This is a joint effort. There is improving technology and software, for instance, to OCR image-based content. And I know we employ some of that now. So if you, for instance, if we can detect that you come in with a special keyboard for reading those kind of things, then you'll expose to a different way of looking at the content than if you just come in as a regular user. Because we don't want to put it in the way of a regular user either. So there's a lot of these techniques. So there's a clear aspiration. There's also a long path to get to that stage, especially for legacy content. I know one of the biggest advocates that we have a lot of discussions with is Michigan State University here in East Lansing. I'm sure Gail has had the same discussion. And we can't solve all the things they're asking for overnight. It's like, unfortunately, I don't have a big pot of tens of millions of dollars to solve all these things overnight. But we do want to continue to work with this. And there's also any new products created, increasingly using a very different manufacturing process to live up to those standards. But we've done millions and millions of pages in the past, and sort of that will take a lot of time and cost for that matter to try and change as we go forward. So I can't promise everything's perfect tomorrow, but I can promise an aspiration, intent, really high priority on our development roadmaps, and an open communication about what we we do and cannot do. So.
I mean, for the content that Grand Valley creates, I mean, we're facing the same pressures you are. So I don't think anyone thinks you're doing anything wrong. I think we are looking just for ways to partner with you guys to make it,
and I was want to say
better.
One of the questions that you put before is about the minimum requirements in law, and I think for us, no, it's really about the intent of the law, not the minimum requirements. Because if you're not trying to fulfill the intent, then we're not really doing our job. Again, we would love to do even more than we do today, and we keep working on it. But things like, for instance, the Vogue archive, the Vogue magazine archive, it's kind of hard to make that accessible sort of overnight because it's so heavily image space. It's not a lot of text you can go by and something like that. So it's tricky. It's not easy.
One question that was raised in Charleston was if there's a platform where the material isn't accessible and you can't download it, you can just view it. Is there a way to work with the vendor to get a copy of that file for a student to make it accessible, for us to bear the cost of making that accessible for that one use?
So I think for aggregators, it really often comes down to what content we're talking about. So things that we have control over, our primary sources, both Gale and us offer service where you can get a copy of it. For other things, if you get into like books and then minor, it really has to publish at the end of the day, we need to go back to and ask for it. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but we don't have the legal rights to give it to you. So we would have to go back to the book provider, to a publisher, to have a conversation.
So if it is a product, if it is something in an aggregator, though, would we work through you to do that? Or
yeah,
would we
obviously you can still, you should contact whoever you bought the product from.
Okay.
And it's up to them to go and talk to the rights holder. I would say is that there isn't that many products where you can't download or print.
Right.
At least you might not be able to bulk download, but if it's on a singular or small number of documents, there isn't that many. There is certain restrictions on how much you can download from a platform typically, because again, otherwise you might be in violation of the licensing terms. But that's some of those things that we can often restrict in the background and help you with. So say, even if it's an aggregation product, but we can't give you a copy of everything we have. If you need to download, say, instead of 500 documents, that's where the restriction might be, you need to have like 2,000 for them. Contact us, see if we can do something. We will try and work with you as best we can. Can't promise because sometimes we just don't have rights for it, but whenever these requests comes in, it tends to go to the product managers and then they will work with you to figure out if it works or not. I think everybody in the industry are trying to figure out ways of doing this and help you guys do this as well.
Any questions? I don't want to leave you guys
One
out.
caveat I would say is you would be surprised how difficult it is to get some content out of our platforms. It's not as easy as people think because these platforms were built to put content into the platforms, not to get content out of the platform. So it's not always as easy as you think it is. We're rebuilding our infrastructure to much better do those kind of things, but it's not as easy as people sometimes think it is. So when people say, whoa, we would like to get a copy of this particular material, yeah, I can do that, but I need a developer to work on it for like a week or something like that to get the content out. So it costs us actually thousands of dollars sometimes to actually just do it. And that's a architectural problem in our platforms, the way it's set up, because they were never designed for that use case in the first place. Now when we create a new platform or new infrastructure, it is designed to do those kind of things, but legacy-wise it's not.
Yeah.
So from everyone's perspective, I guess, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is either a new librarian who's going to be working with vendors or a new vendor who's going to be working with librarians?
I would say use your sales rep as a resource. They have a lot of information they can help you with, both in terms of also what might have happened in the past with that particular institution, but in general, use them as a resource. If they see somebody new, they want to obviously make a good impression and build a trusting relationship. So use them as a resource for information would be my recommendation. Build that trusting relationship to start with as best possible and then go from there. But use them as a resource, information resource.
I would say
And school them a little bit if they do things wrong. You tell them.
would say use us as a resource as well, that just to know if they're, because that's why we're here, is we're here to serve our members. So there's, all the vendors we work with are listed on our website, so you can easily see if you have questions about a particular vendor, or if you're having a challenge and you're like, is this just me? That's, come to us to ask, because it may not just be you, but we're here to support whatever you guys are doing. So
as someone who's relatively new to this, I would say take those meetings with your sales rep when they call and say, hey, I'm going to be in Michigan. Do you mind if I stop by? One, it's a great way to get to know them. And I have found that the ones you meet with more frequently, you tend to get better deals from. So,
at the end of the day, you're buying from another person more than anything.
And it makes the negotiations a lot less awkward, and be honest with them.
I think one thing I wanted to mention is in my former job at LCU, this was at the time when a number of universities here in Michigan were opening medical schools. And we had a number of discussions with them about, because they're just trying to understand what kind of resource do you actually need in a medical school, because you're training a completely new department, right? And that's where we could help them with some benchmarking and say, hey, we know that others, first of all, I want to understand what is the kind of medical school you want to create, because I don't want to give you whatever comparison to Johns Hopkins, because that's probably not what you're trying to create. Right? So let's look at what medical school you're trying to create. And then based on that, we can do some anonymized benchmarking. I can't actually say exactly what another university is buying. And then help you sort of understand the resources that might be there, and then have a discussion around those aspects as we go forward. There might also be other models where you say, well, you're creating this new department. I don't have all the money from day one, but I really need access to all the resources. Is there a way where we can work together? So as the medical school grows or this institution grows, the pricing we pay for these resources gets up to what you would normally expect to be the price point. But can we do something over time to get there? Because we want you to be successful with the new school as well. To go forward. So I think open, transparent, build a relationship is really important.
So, I mean, advice that I would offer is, I love that you said take the meetings, because I think that is very helpful in terms of building the transparency and the relationship between the library and the vendor. The other thing I would just suggest is, don't feel like you can't add something to the agenda. So a lot of times when a library sales consultant will ask for a meeting, they'll have a specific, I'd love to cover this, that, and the other. But they should also be asking, what would you like to cover as well? And if they, maybe forget to ask that as you're setting up and scheduling this meeting, I would suggest, offering a few points of discussion with library sales consultants, so that your goals, your needs are articulated in advance of that meeting, so that you both come to the discussion prepared and you're both getting something out of it. And I think that would just foster for a new rep sort of how you will fortify your relationship going forward, right? It's not all about them, and it should be more participative. So add to the agenda. I don't think we get a lot of our customers actually, taking us up on that. And I would just say, please do. I mean, there's got to be something that you're interested in discussing with Gail or any other vendor. So please bring it to the table when those meetings are being scheduled, so that rep's better prepared and can also bring in people that can help you. So part of what I do is travel with the sales team. So if there's some expertise needed in a certain area, right, they'll be able to more easily pull in the individuals that will get you what you need more effectively, and then also broaden your relationships within the vendors' houses, if you will, so that you might meet me, you might meet a product manager, you might meet someone else as they come to visit.
I always try to encourage, especially new reps, to listen more than they talk, because they need to learn about your needs and what it is that you're trying to accomplish before they can even talk to you about what products or what solutions might fit into this particular library or university. So really, I know not all salespeople are very good at listening. They like to pitch things, but that is always my encouragement, and listen more than talk, especially initially. Because if you don't understand what you're trying to accomplish as a librarian or the library, how can we even find the right solutions for you to work with as we go forward?
So there's got to be something that you need or want to know more of. So add it to the agenda. And that'll help them, right? Then they have to listen. So if they're very pitchy, they'll have to listen if you put things on the agenda.
And often, as you mentioned, often they won't know the answer. It's like, for instance, if you ask a Procris rep about what's going well with Alma and Primo, like, well, they probably don't know that because it's a different sales organization. But it doesn't mean that they can't filter that question back or help you figure out who to actually talk to in that regard. So.
Do you expect your salespeople to have done their homework, basically? That's kind of an expectation I have when I'm meeting with a sales rep, that they know our library at least a little bit. They've taken the time to, check out what resources we already have. Is that an accurate expectation?
I think that's it is definitely an accurate expectation. I can't speak to everyone's accountability, but we would hold our reps to that accountability standard that they've done some call preparation, as we call it, and we have several tools in place to help them easily sort of acknowledge, kind of to do that research efficiently. We use things like Tableau so that they can visualize accounts and so on and so forth. A lot of that is a little bit new. I think for new reps, so reps you've been working with for a while, it's not that hard. Those conversations, they're more familiar with you. So time and territory is what we call that. Those are the good sales reps. They've been with you for a long time, so they have that sort of knowledge or wisdom sort of fortified already. But I think for new sales reps, they're so overwhelmed, especially with large providers like ProQuest and Gale, who offer a broad spectrum of products. I think maybe a little leeway at the beginning would be, I guess, just helpful for them, because one, they're trying to figure out our portfolios. Two, they're trying to or it should be reversed. One, they're trying to figure out who you are and what your needs are. And two, they're figuring out our portfolio, right? So they can try to match the two together. So I think initially it might be a little bit overwhelming, especially if they don't come from the industry. And they've
and also the trick is obviously some things you buy directly, other things go to one consortium, go to another. So it can be a little confusing sometimes to figure out what has been purchased.
So for those kind of reps that are new and haven't really participated in the industry previously, I would just say, if you can, give them some homework, point them to specific spots on your website that you wish they'd research for next time. And don't feel sorry about saying, okay, yeah, next time we meet, you're gonna do A, B, and C, and then, we'll discuss those things later on, or this is what I would suggest to you. So again, transparent, direct, open, add those points to your agenda. So if it is a new rep, if you get the email, the famous, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm your new Gale sales rep," I would say, if they're asking for a meeting, I would say, great, I'd love to add these 3 things to my agenda. 1, take a look at our library A to Z list. Let me know what you think our gaps are. B, do this, that, and the other. And then when you are at that first meeting, it probably will go a little better, because then they'll be like, oh man, if I want to, put my best foot forward, I better be prepared for this first visit in these ways. So those are just some tips that I think would be beneficial. And again, I'm a big fan of our partners adding to our agenda. Feel compelled to give some homework to the reps so that they know where you want to head during that meeting and discussion. They use the best use of your time.
And just like Gail is putting more and more tools in place to support them with some of these issues as well. So one of the things, we create a centralized team, actually most of them are right here in Ann Arbor, to do different kind of analysis that can help them prep for this kind of meeting. So, and it tends to be more larger universities or colleges, but they can request anything from a wholeness analysis to really going to your website and figure out exactly what do you have from us, what do you have from EBSCO, what do you have from Gale, and do a comparison. Say, if you have this from these other ones, these are the products that compare to these kind of things, and then we have an open discussion. And because it might very well be that the Gale product is better than ours, and then you just continue to buy that, and you get a better price for it. But at least having that informed discussion, I think the key thing is you want to keep improving our processes to enable you and the sales rep to have an informed discussion. Because at the end of the day, I think it's important that you end up with the best product for the amount of money you have available in your budget. So to speak, the most thinking you go forward. And we want to help you make those decisions. I'd much rather fight on creating better tools and products than fighting on cheating you into thinking you're going to get a better tool or product. So that's my challenge, to just keep improving our products, and that's on me and my team to do. But as I said, holdings analysis, curriculum analysis, especially for primary source, it's often about finding that 1 or 2 faculty members that find it's really interesting. We can help you with benchmarking, so like similar universities to you have these kind of tools and services. So there are different kind of tools and analysis we are testing or creating. Sometimes the library says, like, guys, you guys are crazy now. This is not interesting to us at all. Guess what? We stopped doing it. Or some people say, hey, could you do this analysis for us? And we say, well, we either don't have the information, so we can't actually do it because we don't have access to that information, or we do have information and we can do some things too. Again, just taking my little LC hat on, some of these vendors have so much information about universities and the resource production they have, that they actually have more information than even the university itself. So use them as a resource. They have a lot of information as well.
Just to respond, you said about a new sales rep. The other thing that I've found to be helpful with a new rep is when they come with the email that says, I'm just coming. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I just want to get to know you. These are the kinds of questions I'm gonna be asking. What are your growing programs? Do you have any problems with what you already have from us?
And that's what a good rep should do.
Yeah, and we get that more than, I'm new, let me try to sell you these 10 things that I don't know if you need.
Oh,
So,
that's good.
And they probably don't even know what they are yet either.
We have a question. Along those lines, what role does LIS education play in vendor hiring? In other words, how important is a master's degree in information science for working in your organizations? Do you hire librarians, or do you preference a business background? Do you try to have a balance of both?
I would say a balance of both. We have several employees that have MLIS degrees, but I actually don't have an MLIS degree. But I would say that if you take the time to learn and you're motivated to learn and you're a good partner, I think you'll be successful at our organization. So we have hiring characteristics that we do look for, especially for salespersons. And so they don't all salespeople do not have to have an MLIS degree, but there are other qualities that I think would be more beneficial sometimes than that MLIS degree in that relationship with you all, which is at our forefront in hiring is people that can foster that relationship and actually take the time to learn and prepare for their visits for you. There are technical positions within the organizations, development positions, product development positions, curation positions, editorial positions that might require an MLIS degree. So we will look for individuals that have that background and training, catalogers and indexers, abstractors. There's some skill and some of the roles in the organization that would require that as a must-have, and so we do hire in those categories, in those areas.
But no, the most important quality is integrity and honesty. That's the starting point. And then curiosity for learning, because it is an information-heavy community. So if you can't acquire learning quickly, you just can't function, be very successful here. There's also it's interesting, especially when I was hiring salesmen in the past, just certain industries we never hire from. Like if you've been a pharmaceutical sales rep, you're not gonna be work in this industry typically, because it's a very different kind of process and mechanism. And then to your point is, I think you strive to have a mixture of backgrounds, because if you just have one background, you tend to not be open-minded enough and try out different things. So people who has a librarian background, people who come from people with a research background. We have, including myself, a number of people with PhD degrees as well in the organization. People who might have worked in sort of autonomy. And then also, to be honest, it's a very incestuous industry. So a lot of people have worked for different companies. We have a number of people who work for Gale and the other way around and things like that. I think most companies in the industry often hire people who's been with another company in the industry. I think the only company I know who rarely hires from the other companies is Elsevier. There, every single person tends to come new into the organization.
Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, we've got two.
Go ahead.
I had two. First was just a comment that this is a good reminder for all of us that this is not a game that we're playing, because I think a lot of librarians come into the vendor relationships with their dukes up and like ready for a fight. So this is a good reminder about the importance and your perspective. So I appreciate you being here and talking with us. Sarah, your comments about just how you appreciate what we do. I don't think anyone would disagree with you that we're the smartest group in the room. And then I had a question. So all the vendors seem to come to us for meetings. And all of this talk about all of your legacy platforms and all your systems and your infrastructure changes. Is there ever a time that we could come to your house for a meeting?
Absolutely, more than welcome in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
Not a problem.
Okay.
Also, if you're interested in our Ypsilanti microfilm facility, which is sort of part museum, part production facility, that tends to be a very popular tour with librarians.
Yeah, I was wondering too, is all of your, are all of your systems on site or are they?
No, well, most of it's in the cloud now, so there's really anything. So the closest we have to something which you call on-site is the microfilm production facilities that is in Ypsilanti. It was actually quite fascinating tour because the guy who does the tour has been there for like 40 plus years. So he can tell a lot of good stories. There's a lot of fascinating kind of equipment still from the 50s, etc. So even though microfilm obviously is not, well, I don't believe it's the future, it's a very fascinating kind of tour. But if it's a meeting, you can utilize our meeting locales. That's fine as well. We do that from time to time, not a problem.
Thanks.
Yeah, same at Gale. We give several tours of our agile development area. We're always looking for people to join us to engage with our sales team. So very much like you all have set up, if you would like to participate perhaps on a panel, let's say at maybe one of our annual sales conferences, reach out. Again, you all have my name and my information through Leanne. But yeah, I mean, so if there's any opportunity to get you into Farmington Hills, Michigan, where we're located, we would be more than happy to show you around and to kind of help continue to foster this dialogue and conversation. There's a lot of different opportunities I can think of right off the bat that might be of interest, but feel free, like I said, to reach out if you really want to kind of get to know our work or a specific area or product line in a little bit greater detail. I can help facilitate setting up those meetings.
So one of the things we work on, working with the product team on right now is have the product managers have a better understanding of how the purchasing process works as well. Because often they come up with creative idea, why don't we create the product this way or the business model this way? And it's like, yeah, that doesn't work with how a library budget is structured. So trying to get some of those early mistakes out of the field, sort of getting people in talking about how different things work in the library, talk about how you make decisions is something we're all interested in. We do have, for instance, monthly global meetings with our product teams where we invite people in. Sometimes it's a researcher talking about, say, digital humanities and some study they have done. Other times it's a librarian coming in and talking about different things they've been working on. There's another way for us to disseminate this information into our teams and try to make them smarter and more informed. So again, the last thing we want to do is creating product solution that doesn't really solve anybody's problems. So.
We have one question.
I was just, this might be a little bit out of our scope here, but we talked about communication, like from you guys to us, but how do you guys communicate to each other with the data and
there are industry organizations where there is some level of communication. Some of these include librarians as well. So for instance, I used to be a co-chair of the MiALA business interest group, which talks about different ways of doing licensing language and things like that. And that was actually Kathleen Folger from University of Michigan who invited me to be part of that group initially. A lot of the information is probably also just cross hires. So like we have a number of people who used to work at Yale and the other way around, so we hear some things that way and things like that. But to be honest, obviously we are competitors, so it's more, oh, we're keeping our eyes on them to try and figure out what they're working on, more than this necessarily communication directly. So we read all their press releases and all those other kinds of things as well. So.
Yeah, I think though, I mean, I think the relationship, just speaking specifically historically between Gale and ProQuest has been very amicable in that, you know, within our Gale primary sources cross search as an example, we have ingested EVO, the early early English books online, so that you can cross-search that metadata with the Gale primary source collections, which is amazing. I think there's potentially more we could do in some of these avenues.
In general, of the aggregated scale and ProQuest, I feel have an open approach.
Yeah.
We want to try and be open and collaborative. So you see a lot of cross-integration. Obviously, Primo Summit as well. It tends to get a little more complicated with some of our friends down in Alabama from time to time. But in general, our policy is as long as you want to work with us on an equitable term, we want to work with you. But if you're trying to create terms where it's in your favor, obviously we're not working with you. And that's unfortunate what is happening with our friends down in Alabama. So.
Yeah, so I think that there's opportunities to continue to engage, and I think that that's important. It's important for you all to understand like the extent to which we can't sort of divulge and share kind of information, but then to acknowledge successful partnerships that have transpired in the past with other or between vendors.
No, and even sometimes you might even see big digitization projects where different vendors come together and work together on those things as you go forward, because it becomes a community effort, and it's either collaboration with another vendor or collaboration with universities. I think TCB on EBO is an example of, early in this book is an example of the community coming together and creating it more accessible actually as well, going back to that conversation.
Yeah, but if there's ideas or, again, ferret the information up through, if there's, kind of like a collaborative opportunity, please let your library sales consultant know, and it should get to the right person, and then we can continue the conversation.
And obviously as aggregators, we do talk to a lot of publishers. So we talk to publishers daily basis. So we often will know a lot about what's happening within the different publishing organizations as well. And I see our role to be a facilitator sometimes between also the publisher and the libraries, to try and I can't just make everything in favor of the publishers. I can't just make everything in favor of libraries, which we try to sort of make the bar in that aspect. So we do talk a lot with publishers as we go around, and content providers. So.
And then too, there are some instances where there are set scheduled meetings. As an example, Gale is in all 4 of the major discovery services. So I know that there's an ongoing regular meeting. I believe it's monthly, maybe on Tuesdays or Thursday. I don't know which, I've forgotten that. But where we do, meet with ProQuest or EBSCO or OCLC to make sure that, our content is being discoverable, to discuss any issues that might have come to our attention through our customer base in regard to finding the content in the discovery systems as an example. So there's some of that regularly scheduled kind of meetings with different
and then it's part of being part of the different organization, working with Crossweb, working with all these different kind of organizations is really important part of it as well. I think you continue to see community-wide initiatives when it really is a community problem. So one of the big things that the publishers and aggregators are working on right now is creating better authentication. So because there's a lot of concerns about IP authentication not be super secure, to be quite honest. So using SAML, and how can we find this where it becomes as seamless as possible, so it doesn't become this massive headache for the IT departments, but something where we improve it. But also, if you've already authenticated with one vendor, we can tell in a privacy way, but if you respect privacy, hey, you already been authenticated there. We already know who you are. So when I send you over to a publisher, to a link, that you don't have to re-authenticate, you don't have to put in your username and password again, but we share the information that we, so they can see that without us knowing the privacy information, but it's just going through those protocols where we don't have to key in the information in. So those are industry-wide kind of initiatives we're working on. So there's collaborative discussions there, absolutely.
Sarah, you had some questions?
In regards to the sales rep, for small schools who aren't in the southern part of the state, how might sales reps help us learn their systems after the sale? I'm very aware that we're geographically scattered and might need more training than a systems librarian at a larger school.
So we have a customer success and implementation team that is available and can be leveraged at any time. And we can do, if we can't physically get to you, there's always webinars, WebEx technology, virtual meeting technologies that we can employ as well. And then we have on-demand training materials, marketing materials, and so on and so forth at support.gale.com. So those are all avenues. But again, reach out to your library sales consultant, let them know specifically what your needs are for a touch, whether it's the training understanding how to configure resources, whatever it is, they should be able to point you to the multitude of resources that we have at hand, or even give you an orientation towards those, like what is available if you're unaware of what's available. I think sometimes just an orientation about the whole sort of a range of resources that we have to make sure that you have a successful customer experience, a successful implementation. We can walk you through sort of a general orientation towards those needs as well.
Yeah, because there's a wealth of information online, either to like lib guides or webinar training that you can take videos you can look at. And then, as you said, increasingly a lot of the training takes place using WebEx in order to exactly make sure we can get geographically out there. And getting to the Northern Peninsula is not always the easiest thing in the world. So sometimes over online is more effective.
Are there any other questions?
Anybody have any last thoughts or comments?
No, one thing I would ask you is like also taking away from this meeting, if you had one or two recommendations for us, but we can take back home, Sarah and I can take back home to our organization and recommend to us. So you would like us to see you do a better job of, basically. That's might as well use this as a feedback session so we can have some improvements here.
No, and I think a lot of them you're already aware of. More targeted communications, fewer mixed messages of sales and to-dos. You know, you guys are already, at least you two, are already doing a good job of understanding the academic cycle and when to and not to take things down or change things. So those are for me, those are the biggest things that come up, really.
I think also, obviously, both is relatively large organizations, so we have the resources to look at things.
Yeah.
I think often smaller vendors are much more challenged in terms of being able to facilitate those kind of aspects. And again, that's where our consortium can be really helpful because you can also make it effective for that vendor to engage with our membership and be facilitated in that regard.
And I think maybe just we really do. I mean, we can't do our jobs without the vendors because we can't do what you guys do. We can't do that. So we really do want to work with you to provide these services to meet our end user needs. So we're definitely partners, not adversaries.
No, I think also one of the things you mentioned earlier, like you are doing digitization projects or doing other things as well, where you try and almost create something that's similar to what we do every day. So also feel free if you have some questions in that regard, want some insights from our UCD teams. These are the kind of things we have to share some more of. Because we do learn a lot of things as regard to research. I think one of the fascinating things we've done recently is doing some things with high school kids. And now whenever they see an image, they sort of start clicking on it, expecting it's a video that they can start watching. So there's just a whole new ways of behavior that you're seeing there as well. Or it can also be more infrastructure type of things, deeper integration maybe with Google Drive. I know Gail has pioneered and done a really good job of, or some of these other tools out there. What is it that you are seeing coming horizon? The more you can alert us, hey, this is coming and it's really important to us, the more we can be proactive putting it on our roadmaps. Because to your point, yeah, unfortunately, I don't have unlimited development resources. I can develop everything tomorrow. Sometimes it's 2 years out, sometimes it's 6 months out for us to be able to do so.
And to some degree, providing you feedback on how we see our users utilizing or what walls they run into. I mean, we do usability testing at our university where we actually sit a student down with the website and say, at what point would you give up and go to Google? And they're quite honest, and we see where buttons are not where they expect buttons to be, searches are not where they expect, there's too many results. If we can provide you that kind of information, is that helpful in your development?
Absolutely. Any feedback is helpful in that regard. I think in general, I see most vendors, we are working really, really hard to simplify our platforms because there's, especially when I first started ProQuest, I think you could get up to 150 different items before you actually got to the article result. And it's like, this is just crazy. Like nobody's gonna even look at those kind of things. So we do a number, I'm sure Gail does similar. We do A/B testing, we do heat maps, all those kind of things, in addition to these more interviews and this kind of test you're talking about as well. So we do all kinds of things. Any information we can get in that regard, either in regards to our own products or products that works really well, and something we can learn from, is incredibly helpful. So.
And the good news too with that is that in terms of usability and the user experience is that because of the making the resources accessible to persons with disabilities, it ultimately refines the design and the user interface. And so I think as things continue to evolve and those standards continue to evolve over time, I do believe with so much focus and so much need to have the resources be approachable to those persons with disabilities, I think you're going to just kind of generally see some natural refinements in design across the board, not just within the library resources, but in practicality of just web-based design and avenues. So that's great, and yes, definitely share any of that feedback that you do have. We would be more than happy to take that in, ingest it, and see what refinements that we can continue to make. Definitely.
That was actually what I was going to suggest, is simplify whenever you can. URLs, multiple links,
Simplify is probably the word you heard the most inside our organization. It's really about simplifying everything.
Jumping through a lot of hoops to get to the right contact person or to just get to the article you want.
And I think,
everything.
especially on the sales side, that is exactly why I think Gail has said that. That's why we have the account manager or the sales rep who's responsible. They can then work with specialists who sort of know some details about certain other things. But that person can always be your first point of contact, because part of their job is help you navigate the organization. It shouldn't really be up to you to try and figure out who to contact deep down the organization. You have like one contact person who can help you with that regard. And the same mechanism, if you go into our contact form on the website and utilize there, the first person who will see the information there, again, is somebody whose job it is to try and figure out who to talk to to get the right answer to it. The last thing you want to do is this classical thing, you call on the phone and then you get one person and then you get transferred to another person and transferred to another. You really work hard to try and minimize those scenarios because it's just a waste of your time, it's a waste of our time.
So I guess something just came to me, though. I was just thinking, based on my travels and interactions, one of the things that I think would be helpful too that you all could offer is to potentially share the library sales consultant's name throughout your library, because I know if you're a specific vendor, so if you're a STEM vendor or like more of a humanities-based vendor, we're probably meeting with certain people. The library sales consultant probably meeting with certain people over and over again. So one thing that would be really helpful is to share the library sales consultant's contact information across the library to other roles within the library that you think might have things to report or share back to our organization, and that would be helpful. And you can explain that we're not always going to try to sell you something, right? Obviously, if we got an email from you where there's an issue or something like that, that library sales consultant can direct that, can be the conduit to direct it to the right person. So even if you're distributing the sales consultant's contact information, just feel confident that we'll continue to work with our point people in the sales conversations. And, we're not going to talk money with someone who you've obviously covered over with us that you shouldn't be talking money to, right? We will respect those relationships, but I do think having the opportunity to just kind of...
And that's a good option for that first conversation when you first sit down with the new sales rep. Tell them about, hey, this person is really helpful. Would be something you can talk to about these things. So this person is going to talk about this thing. Because that helps them navigate your organization as well. Because if they get a random email they don't know who it's from, they're gonna be a little confused as well. They might call you up and try to figure out who it is. If you already had that conversation with them about this person will contact you for these kind of issues, and just feel free to. Then that's much easier that way for everyone. So.
Or just ask your colleague to CC, yourself on the communication so that you're both in the loop. So I just think it's more transparency of sharing who the sort of quote unquote Gale contact is within the organization would be helpful.
We have some people in chat supporting that idea, saying that even making the contact information, including names, part of an ERMS record or ERMS record is really helpful to staff that don't deal directly with the reps on a regular basis.
Awesome. Great.
I think that's probably
we're at time.
it. Yeah, we're out of time. That was a quick 2 hours. Appreciate you all coming.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is going to be available.
Yes, it will, I believe, through MiALA. I'll find that out and get that information out there, but it's been recorded and we will make it available.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
How are you?